So I always do a very little bit first. I take a really little bit of composite. And because you, like, what I find, like, I make mistakes is that when I get too greedy, that's how I put it, that I put too much composite. And one, then, like, it becomes overfilled. So you put a very little, just enough to fill the proximal box, and you gently condense because this is composite, not amalgam. So you just do it very softly. Yeah, you do it very softly, just so you don't get any open margins when you're not on the side. Yeah. See, it's just enough that the proximal box is filled. And now I cure it. And now the most important thing to do, I think, for this composite is to actually make the marginal ridge. Because once you have that, once you turn it into a class 1, then everything is just so much easier, and you're just about building a little cusp anatomy. Now, the marginal ridge is not flat. That's the thing. Most people will just put a slab of composite and just make it perfectly horizontal, which is not what the marginal ridge looks like. The marginal ridge actually has a dip, a slight dip on the mesial end. What I do is I like to pack the composite in like this, and then I push out a little bit. You need a little more. And one thing about the marginal ridge is that you don't want to build it too thick because it's thin. So, and this actually determines the place of your mesial fossa. So if it's too thick, then your mesial fossa will be too distal. Do you understand what I mean? Actually, let me try to get a version 2 to show you. It's probably easier. So this is a 30. Let's see if you can see it here. You can see that the mesial fossa is like right here. So you want the size of your marginal ridge to be that big. If you want it bigger or narrow, then the place of the fossa is going to be different. And also, I like to make it kind of round because you see these two lines right here, it kind of goes out like this, right? So you don't want to make your marginal ridge flat. You want to make it kind of like rounded like this, so you can create that line. So yeah, and then like I go like this to create that little dip. And I use an explorer on the side here to get rid of any overhang. Yeah, use that very gently. Don't overuse it or else you're going to create like a huge groove. Okay, let's cure it and see what it looks like. Okay, let's take the matrix band off. Usually when the lab is open, I would polish this. This is the first thing I'll do. I would take it and I'll polish this marginal ridge until it's perfect. And like, you know, get rid of all this overhang here, and actually I'll take the disc and kind of shave it in like this because the marginal is not a 90-degree angle. It's rounded. So you want to like polish this a little bit with the disc but today the lab is closed, so we can't do that. Okay, the next thing you do is that I put a really thick layer on the bottom to make my life a little easier. And the most important thing to do here is not to overfill, to underfill it, because then this leaves room for the next layer, the top layer, to do your anatomy on. Then I will slightly condense it. And now you want to carve the places where you want the cusp to be. So I take this gold instrument and I make a line like this, so you get the central groove. And then also, it's important to notice in the anatomy that the cusp, the buccal cusp, is longer than the lingual cusp. So the center is actually more towards the lingual. So you want to put this cusp right here, like this, and then go up like this. Okay, see how I'm doing that? The central fossa is not in the middle. Like that, you see? And that's how this serves as a guide for you to build your anatomy. Okay. Now, one thing to notice about the cusp is that if you look at it this way, right, the lingual cusp is taller and they're more bulbous, and then the mesiobuccal cusp is the flattest, and it has like a pretty prominent dip right here. See this little dip? It has a little flat over ridge here, and this is like a little more bulbous than the mesiobuccal cusp. So what I like to do is that I like to build, and also one more thing, this cusp goes in to the buccal cusp. Do you notice that? The lingual cusp? It goes in. It kind of like spills over. So if you want to do that, the cusp that you build later will spill over to the previous one. So I always build the buccal cusp first, then I build the lingual cusp. And I always put less composite in the buccal cusp. See? Yeah, you want to get your edges really, really smooth so there's nothing hanging off. So you do as little polishing as possible. Yes. And always clean it off with alcohol gauze. And then you see this little ridge I'm talking about right here? I'm just going to like press on the composite a little bit to get that. Actually, I'll use this one. Just a little bit, like this. And you cure after each layer that you do. Okay, now so that cusp is done. Now, one thing that I noticed make mistakes is that people assume that the mesiobuccal cusp and the distal buccal cusp is the same size, they put the same amount of composite. But it's not, because there's a distal cusp that's taking off a lot of space, so you actually need significantly less composite for that one. So, a lot less. But it is a little bit taller than the buccal cusp, so you can play with it a little bit. And like I said, these buccal cusps, they extend further in than the lingual cusps do. So you want to get the central groove to be, I think 3/5 of the way in. That's, but every tooth is different. Even typodont teeth is different. You want to like bring it out over there so it looks like one continuous cusp going in. Looks good. Yeah, I actually build the distal cusp last because from the anatomy of the tooth, it looks like the distal cusp is actually going into the lingual cusp. That's why I'll build the lingual first and then the distal. You see how I like allow it to go on the buccal cusp a little bit? Yeah, and I try to get the central groove as clean as possible. Okay. Now the last cusp. Like I said, these are a little bit higher than the buccal cusp, so I like to add a little bit more composite, make them like come out a little more. And I allow it to flow onto the buccal cusp. Yeah, try to get it as clean as possible, and don't be afraid to take off any excess because if you take off too much, you can always add more on. But once you cure it, you can't take them off. Yeah, and you don't want to press too hard on these composites. And I really try to keep it so that the central fossa, like you want to keep this area clean so the central fossa still looks like it's closer to the lingual side. Now the last cusp, see? Actually that was like 15 minutes. And you need very little for the last cusp. Let me see that tooth. Yeah. Yeah, you want to let it look like it's going onto the lingual cusp a little bit. Okay. Now, so all the cusps are done now. You want to take a look at your anatomy, see if any part is like too low or too deep. So, because, you know, I always build it conservatively so I can add later. So I see that right here, this fossa looks a little deep. Over here, the central fossa looks a little deep. So you add very, very little. So to just kind of, you know, make them a little taller. Very little. And here, since the details are so fine, I like to use an explorer to carve the anatomy out, just so you can get to be more precise. Yeah, you see how these grooves kind of come out and they're not straight. Okay, let's see what else. And I will actually add a little bit here. It's like right here, it doesn't look exactly like it. You can use a little volume here. I'm going to press on here to get that little ridge. And just add a little more here. Okay, now I'm done. And now today the lab is not open, so we can't polish it or shape it anyway, but I would definitely get rid of this overhang here a bit and just round this out a bit, and that's it, I'm done.